You're so hot.
Did you know that the movie Elemental is filled with subtle details that reference prejudice and discrimination? What's worse is that most people didn't even realize when it happened at certain moments. The first time, for example, occurs right at the beginning of the film when Bernie and Cinder have just arrived in Element City and take a subway. All moviegoers saw the scene where the train shakes and a little water falls on Cinder, making her slightly dimmer. Right after that, her husband picks up a piece of wood and gives it to her to eat, which restores her flames to normal. Then, he gives a nasty look to the water guy who accidentally spilled water on his pregnant wife. Most people think he did it because he's grumpy, but in reality, his reaction was entirely justified because it wasn't an accident. In fact, the guy intentionally spilled water on Cinder, even though he saw she was pregnant. The proof is that he kept looking at Cinder and Bernie with disapproval and discrimination the whole time. Moreover, you can see him turn his head deliberately to make water fall on Ember's mother. So this time, Bernie had a genuine reason to be upset. This is a detail that many people missed, and it's directly related to the prejudice theme that the movie addresses, both directly and indirectly. We've picked out some moments that deal with this, and this was just the first racist scene in Elemental that we'll show you today. Language barrier. When Bernie and Cinder arrive in the city, it's clear they don't know how to communicate in the local language. So much so that the admissions inspector assumes their first names are Bernie and Cinder and allows them entry into the city. But the prejudice isn't there. Much later in the film, when Ember goes to Wade's family's apartment, her uncle comments that Ember speaks very well. This is indeed a compliment, but it also shows that everyone has some prejudice or at least a lack of knowledge that people of fire have been in Element City for a long time and are already fluent in the local language. In fact, Ember was born in Element City and speaks it fluently. This small prejudice, often stemming from a lack of information, reflects the misconception that immigrants will always speak oddly or mispronounce simple words.
I just have to say that you speak so well and clear.
Rejection. This next scene will show that racism goes both ways, unfortunately. Just as other elementals often fear and dislike people of fire also make every effort to stay away from other elementals. This is one of the reasons why Ember knows that her relationship with Wade would face a lot of resistance from her relatives and acquaintances. This happens in some moments in the film, like when Bernie serves Wade extremely spicy food, or, a little earlier, when he encounters his future son-in-law in the convenience store basement and confronts him with a fork. But undoubtedly, the scene that most highlights Bernie's aversion to people from other elementals, especially water, is when Wade shows up at the passage celebration to declare his love for Ember. Even though she lies and publicly states that she doesn't love Wade, Bernie scolds his daughter in front of everyone and simply ends everything immediately, making his disappointment with his daughter clear for allowing a water person to fall in love with her. So folks, it's a mistake to think that there's only prejudice on one side, when in fact, it can exist on both sides of the coin.
You have been seeing water?
You caused leak in shop?
You will not take over the shop.
Door slamming. Back at the beginning of the film, we see that when the fire couple, the protagonist's parents, arrive in the city, they immediately look for a place to settle. They may not know the language, but they understood some words and realized that the signs on the doors indicated available rental spaces. The issue is that when they knocked on the doors, some barely opened and gave that typical awkward smile to come up with an excuse. Others, ruder ones, closed the doors and made sour faces, just like that water person. This might be another factor that eventually led Bernie to develop even more hostility towards people of that element. Of course, someone might argue that those people didn't welcome them because their homes would catch fire as soon as they entered, which is probably true. But that's no reason to be rude and impolite to someone knocking on your door in search of shelter. In these cases, it's always better to tell the truth and explain why renting the property wouldn't work for either party instead of rudely slamming the door in someone's face, revealing that yes, there was some prejudice in most of those who rejected the Lumen family as soon as they arrived in the city. Prohibition of seeing the ancient trees. When Bernie tries to take little Ember to see the ancient trees, they are prohibited from entering because any fire person entering would pose a risk to the wooden trees. This is understandable, especially considering something that happened many years ago. But two things draw a lot of attention: the way the guard and the people treat them, explicitly telling them to go back to their country or neighborhood. This undoubtedly conveys the idea that you are not welcome in a place and the feeling of being completely unwanted, which is indeed the case in this scene. But another thing that catches the eye is that even after all these years, the restriction still remains. Let's be honest, if the city administration really wanted to integrate fire people, couldn't they have created a second route for people from that element, as well as other elementals, to access the trees without endangering them with fire? It's quite likely they could have, since the city is extremely well designed and very technological, especially in the areas designed for the first three elementals who arrived in the city. water, earth, and air. All of this really demonstrates that even the city's public administration has no interest in integrating fire people due to pure discrimination, which only makes the separation between this group and the rest of the elemental people more evident.
That's a fool! Go back to Fireland!
My dad was so angry and embarrassed.
Absence of fire people. Another moment where we see a bit of discrimination is at the stadium where Wade and Ember go to watch the airball game. As in most cases, it's more subtle and not necessarily direct acts of racism, but rather the consequences of them. For example, you can see that there's practically only Ember as a fire person in a stadium with literally thousands of people from different elemental backgrounds. Ember's expression when she has to pass through, as well as the water people who visibly appear uncomfortable due to the heat she emits from her body, shows that it's an extremely unconventional situation, and they almost never interact with fire people. It's not just that we don't see fire people. Another place where they're practically absent, probably because they feel unwelcome, is on the subway. Once again, Ember is the only fire person there. Hold on, there's more! The same thing happens at the cinema, where people are visibly displeased by Ember's presence, to the point of squeezing the popcorn so hard that it breaks and spills. One thing is clear once again, despite fire people being accepted in the city and allowed to live in it, it's evident that almost everything designed in the city, both transportation and leisure venues like a sports stadium and a cinema, were not designed at all to accommodate people from an element like fire. And once again, we have to repeat, fire people have been there long enough for these modifications to be made. Clearly, there was simply no interest, probably because they didn't consider this group of people important enough or treated them as second-class citizens.
Fire! Fire! Ah, fire!
Hey!
Oh, sorry!
Claude. Last but not least, we couldn't forget to mention poor Claude's classic case of romantic discrimination by Ember. Not that giving a flower plucked directly from his armpit is a super romantic gesture, but the detail of the prejudice ingrained in Ember's mind is reflected in her words when she says that elementals don't mix and ends up evaporating the plant she received as a gift. The fact is that the film proves the opposite from start to finish, showing a valuable lesson about how even this racism that is in our minds, sometimes without us even realizing, as in Ember's case, turns out to be nothing more than an illusion that needs to be deconstructed by something even stronger, which in her case is the love that Wade feels for her. The fact is, Claude is also a warrior who never gives up, and it's clear that his preference has always been for women with higher temperatures than him. The problem is that he was aiming at the wrong age. But at the end of the movie, it seems that he really managed to find a suitor who seems to match his charms and is just the way he likes it. This is indeed the best way to break down barriers and overcome prejudices, with pure and genuine love. Go for it, Claude. We're with you. These were the most racism-related scenes in Elemental that we brought to show you today. If there's any we didn't mention, please comment below. We're sure you enjoyed this video and can continue to enjoy it. So we've selected these two super cool videos for you to choose from and click on. I'll tell you a secret. The first one is really awesome.